All of our narratives are created for the purpose of entertainment. I am a 28-year-old male and was scheduled to be enjoying my honeymoon in Hawaii today with my life partner, Brenda, who is 27. However, I have instead chosen to write this Reddit post about the same woman who has now become a part of my life. Yesterday was my wedding day, which was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. However, it turned into a nightmare when I discovered that the woman I had married just a few hours ago had been engaging in sexual relations with my best man right before we exchanged our vows. My wedding was a 2-day event. The wedding day commenced with a bachelor party and a bachelorette party on the day before the wedding, followed by the actual wedding ceremony yesterday. The plan was for us not to see each other during these 2 days, and I'd only lay eyes on her at the altar. This is how it was supposed to go down. We had our pre-wedding celebrations separately, even though they were held at the same venue. The groomsmen and bridesmaids had the freedom to crash each other's parties, but the bride and groom were off limits to each other. It was a blast. We partied separately and got pretty wasted. Eventually, we passed out around midnight the next morning. I woke up, got myself ready, and we headed out to welcome our parents. We even went to pick up our grandparents from the airport. Despite the wedding celebrations being held at the same venue, the groomsmen and bridesmaids were permitted to attend each other's parties. However, the bride and groom were prohibited from interacting with each other. The celebrations were a great success, with the couple partying separately and consuming alcohol to excess. The following morning, the couple woke up, got ready, and proceeded to welcome their parents. They even went to pick up their grandparents from the airport. The airport and the wedding proceeded according to plan. The ceremony was followed by a lunch with friends and family, during which toasts were made to the newlyweds' happiness. Everything seemed perfect up to that point. However, in the middle of all this, I had to use the restroom. Overhearing the janitors gossiping about witnessing the bride getting intimate with the best man, I stayed hidden and listened to their whole conversation. That's when things took a turn. The situation then took a rather unexpected turn. One of the janitors claimed to have witnessed the bride, in her wedding gown, engaging in a passionate kiss with the best man in the restroom. I remained concealed and overheard the entire conversation. The janitors were convinced they had observed the bride, in a bridal attire, engaging in intimate contact with the best man. The other janitor mentioned that he had seen the best man entering the bride's room early in the morning, assuming he was the groom. However, upon reflection, I realized that I had made a mistake. I could not resist staying hidden and listening further when I finally emerged from my hiding spot. All 3 of them were taken aback by my presence. They left the place awkwardly, and I decided to investigate. I checked inside the restroom but found no camera. However, there was a camera installed in the lobby outside. I hurried to the room where my wife had stayed the previous night. There was also a camera. Outside her room, I contacted my wedding manager and requested that he retrieve the footage from the lobby camera and the one outside the bride's room. Initially, he hesitated, but my desperation convinced him to help. He attempted to calm me down and promised to get the recordings, but only reluctantly. I returned to the lunch table, not wanting to create a scene in front of the guests. I couldn't help but notice the body language between my best man and my wife. My wife and best man were acting as if nothing had ever happened between them. I felt a lump in my throat, but I had no one to confide in. Both my best man and my wife were the most significant people in my life that day, and they had both betrayed me. My restlessness must have been apparent, because Brenda and others asked if I was okay. I looked pale and was trembling with anxiety. People were dancing, and they tried to encourage me to join. However, I declined, citing fatigue, when my best man asked Brenda for a dance. It would have been a joyful sight if this had happened before my restroom break. However, now it disgusted me to see them together, knowing what they had done to me. As I watched them dancing, I couldn't help but imagine what they might have done the previous night. I know it sounds pathetic, but I couldn't help but imagine the details of how they had betrayed me. A short while later, I received a text message from the wedding manager informing me that he had obtained the recordings. I requested a meeting in my room, and Brenda was engaged in conversation with the best man and other groomsmen. I returned to my room, collected the footage from him, expressed my gratitude, and requested that he leave. I instructed him to inform anyone inquiring about me that I wanted some time alone. He nodded and exited the room. I locked the door. I was visibly shaken as I prepared to view the recordings. I was aware that my life was about to change dramatically as I played the footage of our wedding day from the lobby camera. I observed my best man entering the men's restroom. Subsequently, when it emptied out after others had finished using it, he likely locked the door from the inside and summoned Brenda. She discreetly entered the restroom and they remained locked inside for approximately 10 to 12 minutes. Approximately 10 to 12 minutes elapsed before a few other men attempted to use the restroom. However, the door was bolted shut. Eventually, they must have alerted the security or janitors, as a janitor came to knock on the door but received no response. He then directed 2 other men to use a different restroom upstairs. The janitor returned with a key and unlocked the door, allowing Brenda to leave the restroom. Tears welled up in my eyes at this point, as this was sufficient evidence. However, my curiosity led me to review the footage from the previous night. What I observed was a premeditated and deliberate act of betrayal. The couple were engaged in intimate behavior in the lobby while heading towards her room. His hands were all over her. I could only imagine what transpired once they entered that room. I was overcome with emotion, realizing that my wedding day had been ruined. In the room, I stood before the most important people in my life, crying and cursing my fate. There were multiple knocks on my door and my phone buzzed incessantly with texts and calls. I reached out to the event manager and requested that he inform everyone to give me some space. He complied and the knocking ceased, but Brenda continued to text me to check on my well-being. I eventually turned off my phone, yet my restlessness persisted. I exited the room and discovered that the majority of the attendees had already departed. Only a small group of family members, including both sets of parents, siblings, and a few close friends, remained. The best man had also vanished from the scene. Brenda was in tears, and her maid of honor, parents, and others were consoling her. As soon as they saw me, everyone rushed over. My mother gave me a hug and asked what had gone wrong. However, Brenda kept her distance. It is possible that she and the best man were aware of the circumstances. I informed her that I was cancelling the marriage. She became extremely distressed and the others asked me a number of questions. I switched on my phone and showed her father the footage of Brenda engaging in intimate behavior in the lobby. His reaction conveyed the gravity of the situation and everyone understood the situation. I decided to leave the venue. The event manager contacted me to discuss the final settlement. However, I informed him that he should address the matter with the bride, as she was causing a scene at the venue. I have not communicated with anyone since I left the premises. I have been driving over 200 miles to a secluded rural area where I have been staying since yesterday afternoon. I left the venue in my wedding attire, but along the way, I changed into my gym clothes, which I had stored in the trunk of my car. It has been a rather unfortunate series of events. I have isolated myself and have not spoken to anyone since. The last meal I consumed was the wedding lunch. I intend to visit the pastor to commence the wedding ceremony, but I am currently lacking the motivation to do so. Our flight to Hawaii was scheduled for this morning, but amidst the chaos, I forgot to cancel it. I actually woke up today to the final calls from the airlines to board the flight, so that money was wasted. I did manage to cancel the hotel bookings, but I was unable to obtain a refund because it was past the cancellation deadline. Eventually, I only received partial reimbursement for the return flight from Hawaii and a few water sports bookings. In reality, I have incurred significant financial losses, but the emotional toll is far more severe. I am uncertain how I will cope with this traumatic experience. I am experiencing severe headaches and a profound sense of loneliness. To provide an update, I was in a highly distressing situation. I am still in a challenging position, but my circumstances have somewhat improved since my last update. I spent over a week in a state of distress, staying at a poorly maintained motel near the highway, which is frequented by truck drivers and road trippers. For the duration of the night, I was indifferent to the condition of my surroundings. My primary objective was to extricate myself from the familiar environment that had become oppressive. Approximately 2 days later, I compelled myself to descend to the supermarket and procure essential supplies. It had been 2 days since I had consumed any nourishment, and I came to recognize that I was rapidly losing weight. After procuring the necessary provisions, I finally consumed a meal. I then took a shower and arranged to meet with the pastor who had officiated our wedding. He was as astonished as anyone when he learned of the circumstances that had befallen me. I informed him that I was departing from the wedding venue, fabricating a plausible explanation. I was obliged to attend another wedding. I was unaware of the annulment process, so I consulted with the pastor. He informed me that annulments are typically granted in cases of fraud, forced marriages, misinterpretation of vows, or if the vows were taken under the influence of alcohol or drugs. I inquired whether my case could be considered fraud, given that my spouse had cheated on me right before we exchanged our vows. He informed me that, in addition to the religious ceremony, we had also legally registered our marriage with the magistrate's office. The option of an annulment was not available to me, as I was required to proceed with the divorce process. I was disinclined to confront my former partner during this process, but I had no alternative. I sought the counsel of my parents, who were understandably distressed by the situation. They offered to provide me with whatever support they could. I requested the assistance of a lawyer, and I was fortunate to have my father, who is a businessman, provide me with the contact information of a divorce lawyer who was well versed in handling such cases. My father had already discussed my situation with the lawyer, so he was prepared to assist me. The lawyer assured me that, in my case, the divorce process should be relatively quick, given that our circumstances were straightforward. My father, who is a businessman, had connections with attorneys. He provided me with the contact information of a divorce lawyer who was well versed in handling such cases. My father had already discussed my situation with the lawyer, so he was prepared to assist me. The lawyer assured me that in my case, the divorce process should be relatively quick, given that our marriage had not been legally consummated. The marriage had not been legally consummated. I met with the lawyer, who assured me that the divorce process would be relatively straightforward. He wasted no time and started working on the paperwork. He mentioned that the divorce papers would be ready in a week and that I would not have to pay alimony. Instead, my ex-wife would have to cover half of the costs. The wedding expenses were financed by me, as my father had informed the lawyer. This was the reason for the inclusion of the term to recover the wedding costs. I also learned that my father had settled the payment with the wedding planner after I had left the wedding venue. Brenda's parents promptly left, publicly disowning her. Her maid of honor accompanied them. Eventually, only my parents and grandparents remained. I gathered my belongings from the wedding and settled things with the planner. My mother handed over the keys to my house. Brenda had moved in with my parents. She reached out to my mother and apologized, requesting her help in reconciling our relationship. My mother facilitated the reconciliation. It is evident that she would not intervene in our affairs, leaving the decision entirely up to me. Some individuals have questioned the choice of best man and the suitability of having someone like that in the wedding. I would like to explain that he has been my friend since college and that we have known each other for a decade. Despite his current residence in Seattle, we maintain a close relationship. Despite the distance between us, we maintain a close relationship. When I informed him of my wedding plans, he was more enthusiastic than I was. He traveled to the wedding a week in advance to assist with preparations and shopping. He is not merely a friend, he is akin to an extended family member. This was not the first occasion on which he had met Brenda. Prior to this, he had met Brenda and had never acted inappropriately. We used to hang out together whenever he visited, even after I started dating Brenda. With regard to what he was thinking when he crossed the line with my wife before the wedding, I did not want to dwell on it at the time. All I wanted was some peace of mind. Now, let's talk about my soon-to-be ex-wife. My wife and I dated for 2.5 years, and even after deciding to get married, we waited for 5 months. During those years of knowing each other, I never noticed any red flags. She was sweet, understanding, and never made advances toward my friends, even when we hung out with my best man. There was never anything suspicious when I returned. Upon returning to my now empty house, I experienced a sense of unease. Previously, we were engaged in preparations for the wedding and our future together. However, these plans have now been thwarted. My mother visited me the following day and stayed with me for several weeks. She performed an admirable task of cleaning and renovating the house, removing all the belongings that Brenda had accumulated. I was left with a considerable amount of work to do, and I was aware that I needed to regain control over my life. One of the first things I did was join a fitness club to keep myself occupied and clear my mind. I had already been experiencing a great deal of stress due to the negative thoughts that I was having, so I decided that I might as well channel that energy into working out. Furthermore, I derived a positive outcome from this endeavor. I was not particularly unhealthy or overweight, I was merely on the chubby side. However, I have already lost 5 pounds as a result of exercise. Additionally, I have been engaged in productive activities at work. When Brenda received the divorce papers, she reached out to me via text message, inquiring about a potential meeting. This was her first communication since the day. On that day, I was struck by a profound sense of regret. I had been avoiding her and treating her as if she did not exist. When I received her text message, all those emotions came rushing back. Eventually, I agreed to meet with her. She appeared pale and fragile, but I stood my ground. Our conversation was awkward and filled with one-word responses. My responses to her questions were perfunctory and lacked specificity. I found the conversation to be somewhat disconcerting. I was uncertain as to why this was the case. I eventually decided to broach the topic of her infidelity and the circumstances surrounding her relationship with the best man. My question caught her off guard, and she broke down, eventually confessing that she had never cheated on me. I had not anticipated this outcome. My intention had been to remain faithful to my partner for the duration of our relationship. However, following discussions with my bridesmaids, I was advised to engage in a final sexual encounter prior to committing to a long-term partnership. During a visit by the best man to the group of bridesmaids during the television program The Bachelor, he made a joking reference to a sexual encounter with Brenda. The best man, in order to facilitate a liaison on the eve of the nuptials, feigned interest, responding, "Sure, I'm game." This was intended as a light-hearted gesture, yet it planted ideas in both of their minds. They began engaging in flirtatious behavior as part of a game in front of everyone, but their mutual attraction did not dissipate when they were alone. Instead, it intensified, leading them to pursue a physical encounter on the eve of the wedding. The incident occurred at a wedding, so it was not a one-time occurrence. It continued throughout the entire night. I recall that it took place after I lost consciousness during my bachelor party. I had to wake up early the next morning to pick up my grandparents from the airport, so I fell asleep shortly after midnight. In contrast, my best man was still engaged in festivities, and that is when the incident occurred. I am uncertain as to whether I should blame myself for retiring to bed at an early hour that night, following her confession. She appeared to be in a state of considerable sadness and inquired as to whether we might be willing to give our relationship one final opportunity to be rebuilt. I informed her that I was unable to trust her again and that it would be preferable for us to go our separate ways, given that our relationship would not be able to survive even if I attempted to do so. My feelings towards her have undergone a transformation, and it is unlikely that this will be rectified in the near future. There is a possibility that I may eventually be able to forgive her, but it is clear that I will never be able to trust her again. She wept, and I was moved to tears as well, but I remained steadfast in my resolve and did not yield. She proceeded to sign the divorce papers and return them to my lawyer, thereby finalizing the divorce proceedings. I am currently engaged in the process of moving forward with my life, taking things one step at a time. My current focus is on my work, on improving my skills and on attempting to maintain control of my drinking habits, which have been somewhat unruly during the divorce proceedings. My mother and sister have suggested that I should consider dating again, but I am not inclined to resume my participation in the dating scene in the near future. I am not yet ready to embrace the possibility of a new romantic relationship. When the best man or maid of honor appears more enthusiastic about the wedding than the groom or bride, it may be perceived as an attempt to compensate for feelings of guilt. In this case, the best man avoided contact after the wedding, and the last time he was seen was on the wedding day, dancing with Brenda. It is possible that he was informed of the divorce. I was concerned that they might resume their relationship following the dissolution of our marriage. However, I eventually managed to overcome this sense of insecurity. Following my departure from my former residence, Brenda continued to reside with her closest friend until the divorce proceedings were concluded. I have not received any updates regarding her subsequent to that point. Consequently, I have blocked her on all social media platforms. With regard to the best man, he entirely disappeared after the wedding. The last occasion on which I saw him was at my wedding, where he was observed dancing with Brenda. It seems likely that she informed him about our divorce. There was a concern that they might continue seeing each other after our divorce, but I have since overcome this insecurity. A few days ago, I encountered one of my college friends, who I also maintained a friendship with the best man who had attended my wedding as a groomsman. I had not kept in touch with anyone after the wedding, not even on social media. He informed me that the best man had been the victim of infidelity and subsequently dismissed by his fiancée. It was alleged that some of the groomsmen had overheard reports that the best man had been with my wife on the night preceding the wedding. After I had locked myself in the room, the venue staff realized that I was the best man and that I had been involved in an incident. They then informed the best man, who had lost touch with me for some time. However, he had received a job offer from the same company where the best man worked, and they subsequently met at the office. The office occasionally saw the best man dating a co-worker, who even got engaged a month ago. However, their engagement ended abruptly the day after it happened. Their wedding was scheduled for this month, and our friend had also been invited. However, the wedding was cancelled, and that's when he found out about it during an office party. The best man had been drinking. Furthermore, he revealed that his fiancée had been unfaithful, which resulted in the cancellation of the wedding. Our friend attempted to console me by suggesting that the best man had experienced some form of retribution for his actions towards me. I responded that I had moved on from feelings of revenge and betrayal when I was the one being cheated on. I had been so desperate I had considered the possibility of causing significant distress to the best man, but I have since come to perceive him and Brenda as mere shadows in my life. I no longer feel any emotional attachment to them. I have, however, embarked on a new romantic relationship with a woman from my office. She is a single mother with a young daughter, and I find her and her daughter endearing. It is too early to determine if marriage is on the horizon. However, her presence brightens my life. Last month, I introduced her to my parents during a dinner. They absolutely adore her daughter. It was a heartwarming sight. While we would like to move forward with this relationship, we are both cautious and prefer not to rush into things. Perhaps we will take a couple more years before considering marriage. If it even happens, we might start living together soon. In contrast, I made a terrible mistake. I lost the only man I have ever loved because of my actions. It is distressing to consider that my actions may have caused him pain. What is even more disheartening is the realization that our relationship has irreversibly ended. I regret that I did not take the opportunity to rectify my mistakes and remain together. I had a partner and friend who I could have relied on, but I chose to end the relationship. I engaged in meaningless flings with random males during this period. At the age of 20, I met my future husband, Danny, at the library. He handed me a book from the top shelf, which initiated a conversation and led to the exchange of our contact details. While Danny was not conventionally attractive, he possessed a certain charisma. Our friendship rapidly evolved into a romantic relationship in which he became my first in numerous respects, including my first date, first kiss, and first love. However, he was not my first, which made me feel inadequate. He had more experience than me, which left me with doubts when he proposed. I felt a mix of happiness and fear, as I worried that I had made the wrong choice for a life partner because I had no one else to compare Danny to. This is when I first suggested an open relationship, thinking it could help me gain. Prior to our wedding, I was of the opinion that I was being selfish in my desire to ascertain whether he was the right partner for me. Danny was extremely displeased by my actions and made it clear that he did not wish to share me. He saw me as his future wife, and his words had a profound effect on me. I was so affected by them that I temporarily forgot about the idea of an open relationship. I agreed to become his wife, and our wedding was a small but joyful affair, attended by our family and friends. The first year of our marriage was wonderful, but eventually, those nagging doubts returned. I was concerned that marriage had taken away the excitement that I had previously experienced. My friends would recount their experiences of romantic encounters and other forms of excitement. I had nothing to contribute to this, so I decided to discuss the matter with Danny. Initially, I suggested the possibility of an open relationship, but his reaction indicated that I might lose him if I pursued this further. I even proposed introducing some variety into our sexual activities, but he was uncompromising in his response. He stated that he would leave if I proceeded with this, which I felt was unfair, particularly given his own dating history before me. I engaged in the same behavior a few months later. I initiated a discussion with the intention of eliciting a different response, but I received the same unyielding response. In retrospect, I recognize the selfishness of my actions. I married my husband while harboring an interest in other men. My thoughts were preoccupied with other matters, yet I was naive in my hope of maintaining Danny's love. I now despise myself for betraying the most important person in my life and giving in to temptation. There is always something that triggers our base desires, and in my case, it was Bob. He was a large man, built like a bodybuilder. His snug attire accentuated his well-developed musculature, and he effortlessly attracted the attention of women. He exuded the confidence of an alpha male. Bob was transferred to my department and became my direct supervisor. This entailed daily meetings. He was in his 30s, older than both me and my husband. He had a flirtatious manner, always speaking in a seductive tone that made it challenging to remain strictly professional around him. One evening, Bob surprised me by asking if I'd like to grab drinks after work. I was astonished. It was he who had initiated the conversation. He was genuinely interested. I was intrigued, but I couldn't bring myself to decline his invitation. We proceeded to a nearby bar, where I consumed a considerable quantity of alcohol. Our conversation shifted from a formal to an intimate level, and I found myself confessing my desire for more than just being a faithful wife to one man. I divulged my thoughts on the concept of an open marriage, which would allow freedom without guilt, as well as my attraction toward him. Bob inquired as to whether I had discussed this with my husband. I informed him that I had, but my husband did not share my perspective and had stated that he would not. Bob advised me to pursue the matter further, but then suggested that I should not seek permission but instead present it to my husband as a done deal. He proposed opening up my marriage so that I could explore this without needing my partner's consent. Looking back, Bob was the epitome of poor decision-making. He was the type of person who gives terrible advice under the guise of it being for the woman's benefit. At the time, I was unaware of his true intentions. However, I later realized that he just wanted to sleep with me. Nevertheless, that night Bob took me to a hotel and made me feel like the queen. I am aware that Danny made me feel that way on a daily basis, but experiencing it with another man made me feel like a giddy teenager again. Upon returning home, my husband was already asleep on the couch, as if he had been waiting for me to return from work. I proceeded to quietly sneak into the bathroom to wash away the smell of alcohol and unfamiliar cologne. I then woke Danny up and informed him that I needed to discuss something important. He replied that he also had some important and happy news to share, which he wanted to tell me first, a delighted smile lighting up his face. As he listened attentively, however, the idea vanished within seconds. Nevertheless, I was already convinced that I was making the right decision. I simply stated that I wanted to spend time with other men and that it would be beneficial if he could support me. I desired other men and wanted him to allow me the same freedom he once enjoyed with other women. Otherwise, I could not be happy with him. It pains me to think about the hurtful words I spoke to the person who had once cherished me. Those words still haunt me and tears well up every time I recall. That moment, I realized how foolish I had been. He stared at me for a long time, then bowed his head in defeat. After sitting in silence for what felt like an hour, he muttered, "Well, if that's how you feel, then fine by me." He got up and walked away without ever sharing his joyful news. On the following day, I eagerly surrendered to my superior's advances. We engaged in an illicit affair on his desk, which marked the beginning of a series of events. Bob became my first lover after Danny, but he was not my last. I began going out on Fridays with colleagues to their preferred pub, and on occasion, I would wake up on Saturdays. In the arms of a stranger I had never seen again, I had become promiscuous. I believed that Danny had come to terms with this, despite the fact that I continued sleeping with different men almost daily. After 2 months, reality slapped me in the face. On a Friday, while getting ready for work, Bob came by to pick me up. I assumed my husband had already left for the day, as he usually did. I thought we could seize the opportunity for some intimacy before heading to the office. However, to my surprise, Danny was still at home. He answered the door to find Bob standing there. I observed them conversing while holding flowers. When I emerged from the shower, they were engaged in amicable discourse, seemingly unperturbed by the noise of the shower. Danny did not display any emotional response, whether anger, disappointment, or sadness. Instead, he exhibited only smiles or frowns. I genuinely believed that he was completely comfortable with our open marriage. However, my childish and naive perspective failed to recognize that I was only hurting myself. During the drive to work, Bob teased me about how well my husband seemed to have accepted Ed's concept of an open relationship. This occurred on a Friday, and Bob and I had booked. The room afforded an unparalleled view of the city skyline that night, during which we engaged in a profound act of physical intimacy. I returned home the following day, Saturday, and as soon as I stepped inside, I sensed that something was amiss. An unusual silence hung in the air. My husband and I never worked on weekends, and he would usually have his favorite music blasting through the speakers. I peeked into our home gym, but he wasn't on the treadmill like he usually was on Saturday mornings. I was hoping to find some sense of normalcy. I made my way to the kitchen, expecting him to have made coffee as usual. He always placed it on the kitchen counter. I observed my favorite mug, which evoked a positive emotional response. It offered a glimpse of our shared life. I reached for the mug, intending to take a sip, but discovered it was empty. I found an envelope with a letter, the contents of which I cannot recall. I have kept it as a painful reminder of how I allowed a beautiful marriage to crumble as a result of my involvement in casual flings. I am deeply disappointed in myself. I have made many foolish mistakes, but losing Danny is my most profound regret. The note revealed that Danny had left for a month. Upon his return from a lengthy business trip to Canada, he informed me of his intention to initiate divorce proceedings. He expressed regret for marrying me and spending so much time together. In addition to the letter, there was a plane ticket and a passport bearing my name. The message on the back of the ticket read, "Remember the news I mentioned 2 months ago." It also included a reference to my company's willingness to cover both our accommodations in Canada. They even offered me a job there. However, what struck me the hardest was finding his wedding ring at the bottom of the mug. It was as if my world had crumbled right before my eyes. I spent the entire day just staring at it. I looked at the mug in front of me, unable to eat or drink, lost in despair. The following day, my life fell apart almost as if it had been planned. Danny's best friend arrived to collect his belongings. I cried uncontrollably as I watched him and some movers take away nearly everything that belonged to my husband. Everything that belonged to my husband. Danny's friend gave me a disgusted look and called me a derogatory name. His words hurt at the time, but they have since cut even deeper because ever since my husband left, my home has felt painfully empty and desolate. I tried to distract myself by jumping from one relationship to another, attempting to numb the pain of losing my beloved. A mere week after the incident, Bob requested a transfer. Upon inquiring as to the reason for this, he informed me that he was moving on, stating that the excitement had now subsided. I felt deeply betrayed by this response, and my new supervisor took an immediate disliking to me. My personal life was in such turmoil that it began to affect my work. Subsequently, I was dismissed from my position due to yet another error in judgment. My parents and friends disowned me as a result of information provided by Danny's acquaintance regarding my promiscuous behavior. They were unwilling to accept a woman who had terminated her marriage so quickly and for another man. I lost all of my significant relationships a month later when Danny returned from his trip and proceeded with following the dissolution of our marriage. I implored him on numerous occasions to consider my perspective and even proposed couples therapy, suspecting that I might have nymphomania. However, he remained unresponsive and unwilling to engage with me. By the time we formally separated, I was left without the security of our home, the support of my devoted partner, and the affection of those around me. I continue to harbor profound self-loathing for my role in bringing about this destruction.